Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm just making sure this thing is working. It is. Welcome to School of Life for November of 2018. And to the people that are here for the first, or maybe haven't been here in a while. So good to have you all. We're going to, it just feels strange to be sitting. What we're doing today is we're reading from the book that I'm writing, which is about the work that we've been doing here for the last 5 years or so on the soul, listening to the soul and trying to let the soul inform us of living a more authentic life, I guess, is something to say, although that sounds a little cliche to me, but I'm trying to figure out how to do my elevator speech. And I'm trying to remember if I read to you the little introduction that I wrote last time.
I think the first time, yes, I did, yeah.
Well, the first time I read about my story, and then
Last month you read the introduction.
Oh, did I? All right. Well, then I won't. Well, maybe I will. I'm gonna read. Because I did add some to it. Because what I'm trying to do is hit the sweet spot between complete materialistic view of the universe as there's nothing, there, and a lot of different religious theory, because I think the soul, everybody has a soul, whether you belong to a spiritual or a faith system or not, and that sometimes when we're talking about the soul, we get lost in having to figure out the whole God thing before we can actually pay attention to our souls. And so that certainly got in my way. And so I'm trying to kind of hit that. I think there's a lot to talk about in that place that not a lot of people talk about without getting into some kind of, ideology or another. And so I'd kind of like to say that up front to people who may or may not be interested. So I'll read my little revised introduction, and then we're going to talk about the chapter called "The Soul is Subterranean." And so while you're listening, I didn't put questions on the board, but you guys are so good at just kind of reflecting and thinking about the concepts on your own. I just, I might come up with some questions when we're done just so we can have a conversation, because I think this is the key, the pivotal piece in the whole work. Because otherwise, why would we have to talk about the soul if we already knew it? If it was speaking English, if it was, talking A to Z or 10 steps or whatever, we'd have it down. But the fact that it doesn't do that is a key thing. So I'm just going to start reading, and thanks for listening. Okay. Welcome. Hi, come on in. I know what you're thinking. You don't want to waste your time on another self-help book. I don't blame you. These days I prefer fiction, with very few exceptions. I gave up self-help books a long time ago because I have yet to finish the ones I've started. I have a whole case of books, most of them half read. That seems like a waste, although come to think of it, it's not that hard to reduce a self-help book down to its basic ideas, scan the practical tips it offers, and then decide if I want to put into practice what the author is suggesting. Maybe you're thinking of doing the same. If you're reading this, you probably consider yourself soulful in some way. You're attracted to spiritual ideas, but you're a busy soul, making your way in the world. I get it. Me, I like to peruse the table of contents to see what I'm in for, see where the author is headed, and if I'm likely to learn something I don't already know. Often I'll randomly open the book and read a few paragraphs just to see if the writer can hold my attention. You're welcome to do that with this one. Maybe you already have. In the meantime, here are some answers to questions you may be asking about this book. What does she mean by the soul? Soul is the word I'm using to describe the essence of our true and unique self. Is this a religious book? Because I'm not really into that. It's not a religious book, but it is a bit of a memoir in some ways, and some of my story takes place in the context of religion. I've moved beyond my faith system, but you don't need to believe in God to have a soul, to listen to it, or to benefit from getting to know it. Neither do you need to be an atheist. You can learn about your soul and interact with it inside whatever faith system you may adhere to. Is this some kind of mystical hodgepodge woo-woo? Because I'm not really into that either. Nope, no hodgepodge woo-woo here, although I think you'll find the soul to be more than a tad mystical in the way it speaks and moves. You'll be relieved to know I leave the law of attraction, past lives, chakras, spirit guides, and other such phenomena unexplored, however. And what is a field guide anyway? A field guide is a practitioner's handbook, a helpful guide for navigating the terrain of the soul from someone who is actually in the field. The ideas I offer come straight from my own journey. Is this book going to be practical and give me something I can actually use? I believe so, yes, but if you're looking for 7 steps and 3 principles, you're not going to find them. The soul is much too complex for that. Sorry. How much of it do I actually need to read? The whole thing, of course. Can I just glean a few concepts, gather a few pointers, and be on my way? Probably not, though you're welcome to try. The soul doesn't conform to lists, pointers, tips, or easy answers. What the soul offers is immensely valuable and well worth the time it takes to learn. But if you're looking for something that won't disrupt your carefully constructed life, you're probably in the wrong book. Just close it up and put it back until you're ready. I don't mind. Still here? I'm glad to have you with us. Here's what you can expect. First, a long-ish story about how I got to this point, writing this book, walking this path of the soul. Second, a discussion of the idea of soul, how our souls develop, how we try and protect them, and how we lose connection with our souls in the midst of, well, life. Third, we'll examine the terrain of our soul's journey, what the soul is like, how we can begin to listen to its particular language. For example, we'll examine how the soul is subterranean, the soul is singular, the soul is whole, the soul is countercultural, the soul is embodied, and the soul is a little bit wild. Next, we'll consider some core competencies we need in order to sustain our pilgrimage: tolerating the unknown, collecting artifacts, cultivating alternative ways of knowing, and many more. And finally, we'll explore some practices that will hone our competencies and deepen our courage. Because a soul pilgrimage takes courage, my friends. It takes courage. Welcome. Sorry, I've got it all in one thing. Okay, the soul is subterranean. The soul is subterranean. And I begin with a poem by John O'Donohue. For the unknown self. So much of what delights and troubles you happens on a surface you take for ground. Your mind thinks your life alone. Your eyes consider air your nearest neighbor. Yet it seems that a little below your heart there houses in you an unknown self, who prefers the patterns of the dark and is not persuaded by the eye's affection or caught by the flash of thought. It is a self that enjoys contemplative patience with all your unfolding expression, is never dawned to break into light, though you entangle yourself in unworthiness and misjudge what you do and who you are. It presides within like an evening freedom that will often see you enchanted by twilight, without ever recognizing the falling night. It resembles the under-earth of your visible life. All you do and say and think is fostered deep in its opaque and prevenient clay. It dwells in a strange yet rhythmic ease that is not ruffled by disappointment. It presides in a deeper current of time, free from the force of cause and sequence that otherwise shapes your life. Were it to break forth into day, its dark light might quench your mind, for it knows how your primeval heart sisters every cell of your life to all your known mind would avoid. Thus it knows to dwell in you gently, offering you only discreet glimpses of how you construct your life. At times it will lead you strangely, magnetized by some resonance that ambushes your vigilance. It works most resolutely at night as the poet who draws your dreams, creating for you many secret doors, decorated with pictures of your hunger. It has the dignity of the angelic that knows you to your roots, always awaiting your deeper befriending to take you beyond the threshold of want, where all your diverse strainings can come to wholesome ease. The soul is subterranean. Most of us live lives that are hard on the soul, but not because we know any better. From an early age, we're socialized to learn, achieve, and produce. We move fast and work hard, get as much done as possible, and cram in as much as we can while we're awake. This competitive attitude is typically American. We pride ourselves in being the best at pretty much everything as if it's our birthright. We believe that in order to stay on top of the world, we need to be aggressive, hardworking, and productive. There's nothing wrong with hard work, competition, and productivity per se, but as long as we're caught up in the flow of an ever-increasing pace, we lose the capacity to tune into the part of ourselves that doesn't live by those rules. Eventually, our lives begin to break down and we begin to search for a better way to live. However, even in the midst of a breakdown, we want the solution to be instant, accessible, and plainly stated in doable steps so that we can go on living our lives with as little disruption as possible. That's not how the soul works. The soul lives beneath the surface. David White said, "What is precious inside us does not wish to be known by the mind in ways that diminish its presence." The soul does not wish to be diminished in its presence, thus it will not willingly climb onto the microscope slide or the dissection table and allow itself to be reduced to the sum of its parts. The soul will not submit itself to being conquered, examined, dissected, or analyzed. But oh, how we want to do it, how we want to understand. If we could understand, we would feel so much better, so right, so secure. The mind is a conqueror, and we come from a long tradition of conquering, seizing, grasping, obtaining, and consuming whatever raw materials we crave. We believe that knowing is our manifest destiny. Our right to know drives us to understand. It launches us toward our subject with the force of an invading army. We want to observe, weigh, measure, experiment, dissect, inspect, and digest until we have won, until we own it, subjugate it, harness it to our will, and are ready to move on. This is our fundamental problem with the soul. And this is my problem writing a book about listening to the soul. Doing so walks a precarious line between inviting the soul to speak so that we can be whole and demanding the soul give up its secrets so we can master this whole spirituality thing and move on with our lives. Fortunately, if also maddeningly, the soul will not be conquered. Indeed, it cannot be conquered. Instead, it will recede into the background and allow us to do our thing. It will wait to be discovered, or not, while we muscle ourselves through life. I sometimes envision the soul sitting back like Dr. Phil in front of my dysfunctional self asking, "How's that working for you?" The soul will wait until we're ready to listen. Why is that? Why is the soul subterranean? First of all, the soul is more complex than we know. The soul is a collection of memories, emotion, attachment, vision, and desire, combined with innate aptitudes and intuitions, constructed inside a unique body, born into a unique time and place. So many interdependent systems, so many possibilities, so many factors go into the creation of a person. Our minds lack the capacity to integrate these things fully. It's just too much data. Second, the soul holds truths that are largely nonverbal, knowings that cannot be expressed in words. The modern mind does not understand this and will dismiss anything that will not submit to verbal or scientific expression. The soul has many ways of knowing and is not troubled by the need to translate these truths. To the soul, truth is truth, no matter its form. Take intuition, for example. In 2011, our son and his wife were expecting their first child. The pregnancy was a bit dicey, and my daughter-in-law had been put on bed rest, expecting an early inducement due to health issues. I had been invited to be present at the birth and had flown to Texas a day ahead of the inducement date. Dawn and Justin knew that the baby was a boy, but were holding the name private until his birth. When they picked me up at the airport, I sat in the back seat, thinking of a way to tease them about this, as in, no doubt the reason you're withholding the baby's name is that you've picked an atrocious one, something like Buford. I was about to say, so how's old Buford doing, when suddenly the name Bennett popped into my head. Instead, I said, for some reason, I think you're going to name the baby Bennett. Bennett was indeed the name they had picked out and kept secret from everyone until it popped into my head in the back seat of the car. We were all astonished by this revelation. They assured me they had never leaked their decision and had never uttered the name Bennett in my presence. I secretly took it as a sign that all would be well with the delivery, and it was, but I cannot explain the physics of it. The soul has a language of its own that largely bypasses the conscious mind. It speaks from the heart through love, desire, joy, sorrow, and awe. It speaks through the body and the instincts via health and illness, pain, fatigue, and movement. And sometimes it seems to speak right from the bright blue sky, with random secrets revealed at just the right time. The soul speaks most profoundly through the arts, poetry, dance, visual arts of all kinds, and music. Through art, the soul carries on a million conversations with the world and never feels the need to explain itself. Yet those conversations carry profound truths that resonate deeply and nourish completely. The soul has its own language, a subject we'll revisit in a later chapter. Most of what the soul knows and has to offer is nonverbal, not linear, not always rational, and not precisely conscious, but vital, essential, and powerful nonetheless. The third reason the soul bypasses the mind is that it's an entity greater than the sum of its parts, and the mind sometimes has trouble making the leap. The soul is concerned with wholeness, the whole of things, versus the elements of things. While the elements are important and fascinating, the real life and energy of the soul is in the whole of it, how it integrates all the parts, and in integrating becomes something larger than its elements. By reducing the soul down to its elements, the mystery of the whole disappears, and we easily miss the impact of it. The soul is something one experiences rather than knows, at least in the way that we like to know things. When we study something with the mind, the something we're studying becomes the object of the mind. The power resides with the one who studies. The object becomes the servant of the student, yielding what the student wants to know. But what if the student is unworthy of the object? The Shape of Water is the latest in a long list of films with this dilemma at its core. The movie is a cautionary tale, illustrating how foolish and wrong it is to take knowledge by force against an entity too outside the box for us to grasp. In fact, the entire movie can be seen as a metaphor for the soul. The creature is strange. Have you seen The Shape of Water? Anybody not seen it? They find this creature, he's kind of like a fish. He's kind of like a amphibian, manfish. And this is in the 60s, and they capture it, and they're trying to research him, yeah. The creature is strange, inhuman, large, powerful, and mysterious. Those tasked with understanding the creature are shown to be inept and malevolent. The creature is subdued and languishes in captivity, unable to communicate with those intent on dissecting him. A cleaning woman accidentally gets a peek at him and is intrigued, compelled to learn more, but her approach to learning is different. She is drawn to know in a different way. She's attracted to the creature and longs to connect with him. She can't help herself. Spending stolen time with him, she starts to understand how he communicates and grows to know him by means other than speech. When she sees him suffering and she understands he's close to death, she risks everything to free him and to join with him no matter what. Eventually, we see that the woman is more like the creature than she is like the rest of us. Those strange marks on her neck are revealed to be gills, and as she opens to the creature, she returns to her true nature and lives in the creature's world, which, it turns out, has been her true home after all. At times it will lead you strangely, magnetized by some resonance that ambushes your vigilance. The soul will often lead you strangely. This was a hard lesson for me to learn in the midst of a tumultuous internal shift I went through in the 2000s, when my faith system collapsed. The turmoil that filled my days is hard to describe and painful to revisit. I collapsed into a semi-functional depression, spending the better part of 8 years in an internal spiritual wasteland. I needed help, but I trusted no one. I couldn't even describe the kind of help I needed. The meager attempts I made to get help were disappointing and short-lived. I needed to solve this one myself. Enter the mind. Mind to the rescue. I've always been a thinker, and a good one most of the time. Depression is in my field of expertise. I know this one. I got this, I thought. But no matter how hard I tried to think myself well, I got tangled up. My mind was sluggish and over-revved at the same time. My habit of second-guessing and self-criticizing only added to my sorrow. My theology had failed, my container for reasonability and logic had collapsed, and I had no center to speak of. I became mentally exhausted, trying to think my way into healing. I felt like a total failure, when it was really only my mind that had failed. You know, I only lost my mind, that's all. Being a product of the 20th century modernity, I only knew how to heal through the mind. Information, wisdom, cognitive techniques, reframing, alternate narratives, all of the things, but none of them worked. I was mentally exhausted trying to fix myself with the same instrument that had caused me to be broken, the mind. Excuse me. Around that time, my soul began to lead me strangely. In the midst of my dilemma, underneath all the self-help ideas I had been considering, I noticed 2 little nudges, ideas that held the hint of hope or maybe whim. 1, I wanted to learn how to work with clay, and 2, I wanted to go to my friend's acupuncturist she told me so much about. I had plenty of reasons to dismiss these ideas, partly because I couldn't imagine connecting the dots between these activities and fixing my mental state, but mostly because I was afraid to hope, in case they didn't help. With nothing left to lose, I did both, and each of them played a major part in my healing. Clay saved me, mostly by giving me something to learn that was tactile, wonderfully pleasurable to manipulate, and demanded my full moment-by-moment attention. It also allowed me to create something with something other than my mind. Every hour I spent in the pottery studio was an hour I didn't spend trying to fix myself, an hour I spent listening to earth and water, centrifugal force, and the laws of physics instead. Acupuncture saved me by reconnecting me to my body in a way I couldn't control with my mind. I won't say a lot about acupuncture because I don't understand it very well. In fact, I don't want to understand it. That's the absolute beauty of it. But somehow it ministered directly to the parts of me that my conscious mind was not capable of helping. I just remember feeling, after one particularly powerful treatment, as if an essential part of me had just been resurrected from the dead. Meanwhile, I let my mind rest. I spent my free time working with clay, playing with my grandkids, riding my bike, and going to acupuncture. I began to break my addiction to thinking. I listened to David White, John O'Donohue, and the stirrings of my own soul. I started climbing out of the pit. The mind is a magnificent creation, but it is not equipped to run everything about our lives. This can come as a shock because most of us live in and through the mind, as we've been taught. The mind is the main actor and likes to be in charge. More than that, we feel most secure when our mind is handling things. This is how it should be most of the time. There are things, however, that the mind is unworthy to manage. There are ways of knowing that bypass the conscious mind. But we don't know this very well, and for the most part, we don't believe it. So the mind tries to handle everything for us and does not step aside, even when it's out of its depth. In those cases, we just make things up and call the problem solved. We blame ourselves or ignore whatever doesn't fit, or create elaborate explanations, or simply shut down the conversation. Anything the mind does not understand is at risk of being dismissed or worse. Unlike the creature in the movie, the soul cannot be destroyed. It does not suffer. It does not need rescuing. It merely exists and invites. We need only to be drawn, to seek, and to listen with love and a kind of reverence. As we do that, we learn in ways that enrich our whole being, including the conscious mind. The realm of the soul is strange and wonderful. Many ignore it, some are fascinated and want to conquer it, but there are those who get a feel for its mystery and beauty and are strangely compelled to approach with love. Eventually we learn that we are of the same substance and will risk all to be reunited with the way of the soul. As we do, we return to our true nature and live in the soul's realm, which we learn has been our true home all along. Thanks. I'm going to put this out in the middle because our conversations have been so valuable to me. And it's hard to hear you from my little thing right here. So I didn't come up with a bunch of questions this morning. Now I'm kind of wishing that I had. But I'm really open. I really would love to talk about some of the things that you heard and how your own experiences have either resonated with some of that, or questions that you might have, or just
Doing all the work.
yeah.
So that description of the mind and that contrast of the mind versus the soul was very, that resonated with me.
Yeah. We think we're so on top of it. You know? We think we're just so, we got it handled, and we can handle it till we can't. So yeah.
I want to do a shout out to my recovery program, because that part is actually quite clear to me, that my mind does not run the show. It's actually a servant of something, and it's a servant that thinks it's the boss, and so of course there's going to be angst.
Yeah.
And I was at a meeting last night, and one of the questions that we circulated around the room is, how do you cure a sick mind with a sick mind?
Yeah.
It can't. It has to get turned over to something else, that undefinable quality. But I also was intrigued with the Bennett story, because I've had so many experiences like that. Yeah, maybe not quite so on the mark, but I think there's a level of communication that we have that we don't have. And the one example that I thought of, I was getting flooded with them, but I think we've all had the experience of, you think about somebody and then you turn the corner and there they are.
Yeah.
Isn't that the weirdest thing?
Yeah.
But one time I was offering a Reiki treatment to somebody, and I was working on their lower back, and the pattern on their back felt really, really jagged. And I mentioned it to them, and they said that when they were younger, they were on a swing, and their big brother came and pushed their back, and they fell off a swing and was injured, and it was a trauma that had gotten so internalized until that moment.
Wow.
Not that I was equipped to deal with the trauma. She then went and dealt with the trauma.
Okay.
But those things happen. And I just wonder, I'm looking forward to hearing more, because about developing that communication
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's in the core competencies thing, but I think it begs the question, so if it's going to be subterranean all the time, if it's going to talk sideways or upside down, then how do we start to listen? And that's a hard one to write, but it's kind of like you have to get that first, and you probably are going to need to break your addiction to your mind, because nothing will make sense. The thing that I figured out was, if it didn't make any sense, if the soul is speaking, it kind of comes underneath and whispers a little bit, or talks or throws things at you from from the side. And because those little nuggets don't connect to anything we already know usually, then we just filter them out. We're always, flipping them off, flicking them out of our field of view is what I mean. And flipping them off. So,
In a sense, that's what we do.
That's what we do.
yeah, because it just doesn't. It's a piece of data we don't know what to do with. So, and it doesn't fit how we were taught to think. So a lot of times we lose it. But one of the things that you can do, or should begin to do, is go back over your life. So one of the things that I did was, because I kept having these weird things happen, I should think of some examples, but one thing that I did do was go back over my life and think about any specific moments or episodes in my life where I seemed to either be led to do something a different way, had an odd thought that stuck with me, had something that really I was involved with that seemed to express who I really was. Some weird thing. Like some people will look back and go, well, I work as a computer programmer, but when I was about 8, all I wanted to do was draw things, stuff like that. That's a pretty easy example. But going back over your life and picking up these little things, well, the core competency is going to be collecting artifacts. That's what I call it. And where you just kind of go back and go, oh yeah, or this relationship or that aptitude I had, or this direction I went to, as weird as they may sound.
No.
So that's going to be a tricky one to write, but it is. I like that your recovery group is talking about this, because I kind of see it as an addiction, and that we defend with our lives, and if we don't understand something, we feel really, really uncomfortable. Yeah.
I had a therapist one time explain to me a thing about I just wanted to know. I just wanted to understand. I'm like, I just want to understand why. And he was like, you're just trying to control it. Just wanting to know is trying to control it.
That's right.
And that's, I think, what we do with our mind, with trying to do that. So the whole letting go and letting the soul just be is totally resonating.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was a new therapist, you get a few tools in your toolbox, and then you want everything to conform to the tools that you have. And a lot of my tools were educational in nature, and I was full of them, and I loved teaching. So I did, in my early years, I did a lot of educating people, mostly around kind of codependency and addiction and those kinds of things. And I worked really hard educating people. But I noticed that no matter how inspired they felt or how many insights that they seemed to get, their change, they weren't changing. So it was like, as the education goes up, the change kind of doesn't. And I just got really tired. That was one of the first times that I burned out, was because we just talked about this last month, and they're going back to the same things and doing the same dumb things. And almost as if knowing doesn't fix things, So that was my first clue. And then I just started thinking about what makes people change, how do people actually change? It took me a long time to figure that one out, and I'm not sure I have.
I have a
Tell me your
question.
name again.
Teresa.
Oh yes, sorry. I ask you every time.
It's okay. In the very last paragraph that you read, you said something about the soul can't be hurt or something like that, and that just kind of hit me no way. I feel like there is soul pain or damage sometimes. Is that not?
Yeah, well, this is a kind of a radical thought that I picked up along the way. Because it feels like there are lots of injuries to the soul, to our deep self, to our core, piece of who we are. But the idea is that even behind that is a part of our self, that's the true soul that really can never that can never be damaged, that's always there as a resource for healing and strength and whatever. So even though our wounds are deep, there's still another part of ourselves that is maybe has that connection to the divine or to something that's larger than ourselves or whatever, but is always there and can never be damaged. And that'll be in the next piece that I read about how the soul is whole. I was talking to my acupuncturist, interviewing her for another chapter of the book about embodiment, and she was telling me the ancient Chinese way that they look at the soul. The soul is a part of us, and so when she talked about being damaged or something, the soul being damaged or hurt in some way, she said actually it's probably not that the soul is hurt, it's just our connection to our soul gets damaged. And so I think we're talking about more closer to the core, more authentic, like values that we hold are real deep core parts of us that can be violated, but then the connection to the soul is necessary at some point. And it's just it was a radical idea that I got actually from reading Janine Roth's book, Women, Food, and God. And when she first says it, you know, to connect with once you get rid of all the noise and all the stuff in your head, then you can connect to the part of you that's never been damaged, never been broken. And I was like, what'd you say? You know, what? And as I started considering the possibility of that, it just gave me so much hope. And then as I started practicing, like stepping away from the conflict, stepping away from the story, stepping away from the emotions, stepping away from all of the things and into the stillness, then it was like, oh, yeah. So the hope that it gives is that if that's true, then I can be whole.
Yeah, that reminds me very much of this past May, I was honored to go to Dachau and to Nuremberg. And there were stories that the locals were telling, the local tour guides were telling about the resilience of the people that was just mind-boggling. How did they do this? How did they survive this? How did some of them get out and write about this and tell those stories? So that rings so true that part of us can never be damaged. It had to be something like that that helped human beings survive those horrific atrocities.
Yeah.
It just rings so true.
Well, yeah. And that was one of my thoughts too, is not only do they survive but thrive in some ways, like, and that's kind of miraculous. Yeah. And so if we all have that potential and we just need to restore the connection to our own soul and, you know, take on that process, then that's a lot of hope right there. Mm-hmm.
That's what Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning addresses. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There are two things that I'd like to bring up. At the end of your introduction, you spoke of this search as being dangerous, and I'm puzzled by that. You know, what's the danger? Why do we need to have that kind of feeling about it?
Did I say dangerous?
Courageous.
We need courage.
So
Yeah.
So that's the sense that I got from reading.
Yeah, that's a really great question.
And then the other thing is, as you envision soul, do you envision that this is a part of the physical realm, or do you see a separation between our mind, that it's something other, not, does the soul have physical properties, in other words?
That's a great question. Can you hold on to that one? Because I will.
Sure.
Because I'll get lost answering the first one, then you have to remind me about the second one. And now I forgot the first one.
Courageous.
Oh, courageous, yeah. Okay. I think it takes courage because it scares everybody to go deep inside themselves. We're just freaking terrified. And this is evident because you just see over and over and over how people who are ruining the lives of human beings, themselves and other people. And they'd rather do that than to sit still and deal with their emotions, hold them, understand what's going on, let themselves be vulnerable, explore the possibilities. I see this all the time, because I'm picking up damage and helping people recover from horrendous situations just growing up. Like, who would treat a child that way? Who would, why would we do that? Even, and not just abuse, we can take that for an example. People who do abuse other people, they still love them. They still desperately, don't understand their own behavior. And so, but what we learn growing up is that vulnerability is the no man's land. That's the place you do not go, the place where you don't know what you're doing, where it feels like things are falling apart, when you have to admit that you're terrified or whatever. And so people who go into, say, a healing process, you can't just, you have to be dismantled in some ways, and we resist that like crazy. And so because no one's ever taught us how to do that. No one's ever taught us that it's okay to say what you feel, and to be present, and to be supported, and to be, to be in a safe and holding environment where we can walk through these things. So in our natural development, time's moving really fast, and kids are growing up, and they don't have the right equipment to be able to keep up, much less digest everything that they're taking in. So even in the safest of home settings, there's some reintegration or some process that probably needs to be done. But we usually just sort of stuff it down and keep going. That's kind of the best we can do. And so then when our survival schemes start to break down, we get really, really scared. And so we want to either up keep doing what we were doing, try some new scheme. When the mind and the ego are in control, which they are, they don't, they're just always panicking. It's just always trying to, stay strong and avoid the crash all the time. And so the ego just stays in control. And some people are better at it than others. So they can drive with their ego all the way through their life and die. That's what they do. And damn whoever gets in their way, or you shrug them off or whatever. But then there's the rest of us. And especially if you have any kind of soulfulness or draw to understand or to search for meaning or that kind of thing, then our schemes seem to break down sooner.
If I could stop you just for a moment. You're describing all people as if they're all damaged, and that may be true. I spent time this summer with somebody who is deeply damaged, but I don't have a sense that everybody is damaged.
No, I don't think everybody's damaged per se. And I certainly spend all my time with people who are, because I'm a therapist, so I have a skewed perspective. But you can have really healthy egos, for sure, and people who are, pretty well integrated and they're just doing their life. And I think it's possible, theoretically, I guess I think, okay, let me just stop for a second. I think that we spend the first 20 years of our life just getting grown up, surviving our childhood, whatever. The next 20 years, roughly, living it, trying to build it and establish it. And then the next 20 years and beyond, kind of going back to try to integrate it. And so I think because the process of just getting to adulthood means that we're a little bit disintegrated, which is not the same as damaged. And that adult development is a kind of integrating so that we kind of feel like we're whole. And some people have more damage to do, and others are just kind of integrating who they are and refining who they are. I just think eventually that our egos, our minds, we've been taught very carefully to live from there and to control our lives. And I think that's kind of universal. And so that can start to break down because it's not sustainable. A lot of a lot of the strategies that the ego builds come from childhood. So it's sort of like the rules that set that thing in place are old rules. And like Ernie Larson, one of our teachers from back in the 80s said, it's like your 6-year-old is driving the bus. That dilemma, which is, we set these rules, don't trust these people, make sure you look good, don't feel these feelings, don't ever cry, those kinds of things. They're like 6-year-old rules. But we're grown-ups now, and we have important things to do, like driving the bus. But those deep motivations come from like less mature minds, and because they're so emotionally packed and charged, they're the important ones. And so then we go into relationships, we have children, we have jobs, we try to have friendships, and we're still operating in some sense like we did when we were 6, when those rules were relevant and necessary. But now they kind of stunt our growth because we're adults. So this kind of, and we're actually integrating a couple of our different aspects of our brain, the lower brain stem, the limbic system, and the neocortex. The brain itself is trying to integrate all of that so that we can, we're not living these disjointed sort of lives.
Yes, I like the way you framed it this time, that it's an integration of two things that aren't naturally or easily connected unless we give it the attention that requires.
Yeah. And so the reason it takes courage is because a necessary part of the process is kind of dismantling the control of the old system. And once you start doing that, well, 2 ways you can do it. You can do it from the front side, I guess, just say, I think I need to get more in touch with my soul. So I'm going to start doing, like, hardly anybody ever does that. Usually it's a breakdown. Usually it's some kind of crisis. Usually it's some kind of something where it doesn't work anymore, or like a relationship falls apart, or some tragedy happens, or we get fired from our jobs, or some kind of something, because the ego driving is not sustainable. Like those old rules aren't sustainable, so they're going to break down after a while, and they're a little bit brittle, and we're missing the best parts of ourselves in some ways. If our ego, depending on how much distance there is between the ego that's in charge and the soul that's kind of trying to nudge you and say, hey. So midlife is a lot of times when we start feeling the rub and wanting to examine what's happening. And that rub can be really disruptive, and it can be painful. And so staying with it when you don't know where you're going or where it's going to take you, how much you're going to have to feel, that's the part that takes courage. And so, and I get to witness that all the time in my office, plus, just in my own journey. That whole mental crash that I had, I literally had made myself sick trying to fix myself. And I had 25,000 ideas and 50,000 ways I was probably doing it wrong. And it was all swirling. Yeah. And I was just exhausted, and I was depressed, and I was heartbroken. And I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't think anymore, and it just crashed. And another metaphor I picked up about that is like I sent my mind to rehab. You need to go to rehab. And so I just had to rest from trying to figure it all out. and that was really frightening. I mean, on the one hand, it was a big relief, but on the other hand, it was really frightening to deal with the unknown. And so that's what I mean by it takes courage, because it doesn't happen. Like, you can't just show up and get, oh, here's 3 things you're doing wrong, just fix these things, you'll be fine. You can, but that's not a deep enough dive. And so
that sounds like still the mind and the ego driving,
yes,
as opposed to the mind and the ego being a servant to the soul, kind of like what you had articulated, that shift from that, it's not like you're trying to get rid of the mind and the ego, it's just like you're trying to say your role is not up front to drive everything, your role is to serve the
it's
soul.
like a change in management. And so the boss has to step down and go to rehab, and then some other like fuzzier, fluffier, or some other part, it's not like the soul's going to take charge either.
Yeah.
But
Not ego number 2.
yeah, it's not ego number 2. It's not like get these people out of office and get these other people in. It's not like that. It's kind of like reforming, because the ego is useful and it's necessary. It just gets out of control sometimes, like the amoeba that ate New York or something. We give it this job to do, and then it does it, and it's trying to protect us. Like last time we talked about protecting the precious. It tries to protect, but then gets busy doing all these things, and so the chasm between our true soul and the ego that we're constructing madly gets, can sometimes we could lose track, and then the ego's not equipped to fix it now. It's because it has become part of the problem instead of the solution. We still need it, so it kind of needs to be reformed, but it can't be in charge of its own reformation. Does that make sense? Because it's like fixing, what did you say? Fixing the mind with it. Fixing a broken mind with them. Yeah.
I think the reason it feels courageous to me is that if I track with what you're saying, which is that as a student of the soul, I'm kind of unworthy of the thing I'm studying. The sense that I have is like I'm like way beyond unworthy. I'm incapable in my own strength, with my own skills, with everything that I think I know. I'm incapable of finding out about this thing that is so much different and greater and more powerful and more fundamental and more creative and more connected to something that's beyond what I can experience with my mind. So I'm coming up against, like, I don't know how you can describe it, but I'm thinking of somebody trying to climb a glacier or something, and they don't really even have the right equipment to try to get up this huge mountain of ice. But they're going to try it anyway, because there's something in them that says I need to go up there. And so that's why I think of it as a courageous journey, because as the student of the soul, I'm really not worthy of the thing I'm studying.
Yeah. Do you guys remember from I think I read it last time, that little vision I had in my head about Jesus walking me across didn't I read that to you guys a couple months ago? I'll just recap it for you. Previously on school, this tumultuous time that I was in, and my faith crash, and we had left our church after 35 years, and I just was having a huge breakdown. I was sitting up in bed. I was kind of journaling, and I had this. It was all I can say. The way it felt like was somebody pushed play on the video screen of my mind. And I was in the scene. I was holding on to Jesus's hand, and this was the Jesus that knocks on the door of your heart. If you've ever seen that painting, with all the flowing, locks and the beard and everything, in the white robes. And so I was holding his hand. He was walking me across this big, round, empty room. And at the other side of the room was this door. And when we got to the door, he stopped, and he didn't really say anything to me, but the door opened, and I knew I was supposed to go through the door. So I stepped through the door that closed behind me, and I found myself in pitch darkness, like complete. I couldn't see. There was nothing. And I was standing there and didn't know if I should keep going. How can I go if I can't see, kind of thing. And I sort of slid my foot up and realized I was kind of on a shelf or a ledge of some sort. And so there's really nothing to do but sit down. So I sat down in the dark. And that was it. That was the end of the thing. And I thought, you look on your face, Teresa, that's hilarious.
I just remembered something similar.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, on the one hand, I was like, because that was Jesus that took me here. It wasn't like, and he was real nice about it. He wasn't, he wasn't mad at me. He wasn't like, you young lady, you're going to outer darkness. It was, it was clear that he was leading me this way, and that I was supposed to go out here. So if it's dark out here, what does that mean? And as I sat down, I thought the one thing that was hopeful was that, well, I don't yet have the equipment. I don't have the senses, to be in this land. So maybe if I sit here long enough, I'll develop some way to see or some way to hear, some way to move. And until then, there's nothing to do. And so I on the one hand, it was really a relief because I was really flailing and sad and, all those things. So to feel like something was leading me, some part of me or God or whoever was like saying, no, this is the next thing. Where you are is where you're supposed to be, even though you don't get it. That was really comforting to me. On the other hand, I sat there I'm still sitting there in some ways, and I just was content to be there. But that was kind of the last morsel I got for a long, long time. And then when I talked to a friend of mine about it, who was a priest and spiritual director and psychotherapist, and I said, so I did this thing, and then I stepped outside and sat down in the dark, and he went, exactly. And I went, what does it mean? I want to know what it means. So it was this kind of real visceral, sort of spiritual, whole thing in metaphor form, but yet I felt it. I am in new territory, and I've got no equipment to navigate this place, so I'm pretty well powerless and helpless. Yeah.
That vision, minus Jesus, for me is happens throughout the day. That was a big example of something that is just like my current state of affairs, in that I have to be willing to be in the I don't know. I have to be willing to be in the pause, which is the darkness. And it does take a whole bunch of courage, because as your therapist or whoever said, I wrote that down, that need to know is how I keep myself safe. And I have I live my life with a certain level of fundamental fear. It's just there. I know why, I don't know why, it's there. And part of the way that I cope with that is to know, or to think I know, or to express that I know. Mm-hmm. And so the willingness to not, and to just stay in the pause, and allow things to become clear with not driving the bus takes a lot of courage, and it also takes community. I find I can't necessarily do it by myself. It's a little too scary to do by myself. But yeah, I think that just being led in the dark, that comes up constantly in the decision, in the willingness to say, I'm not going to drive the bus. Because I find, I don't know about anybody else, I find that often my first responses to things are not necessarily what needs to happen. That first thought isn't always the best thought. In fact, it rarely is the best thought.
Yeah. Or it's the thought that created the situation to begin with. Or it's the thing that's going to perpetuate things being status quo. Or yeah.
I am curious what you would have to say to the question about any physicality to the soul. The second question.
Yeah, the second question is, is there any kind of physicality, or is this soul separate from... That's really new territory for me. However, I have a hunch that, and I certainly used to believe that. The way I used to see the soul was the soul is spirit. See, for me, the soul was just sort of we don't really know what that is, but we understand what spirit is. Spirit is the part of us, inside of us, is in some little chamber inside. This is some little room inside where if you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, that little light goes on inside. If you don't, you're dead. If you do, you're alive. That was what I was taught. So if that's alive, then that's great, because then now you can talk to God, and that's like God in me, in here, in this little box. And it was very comforting to me because, God right inside of me. But on the other hand, it was just God, not me, God, but God in me, but not me, So this dichotomy was very strong in my mind. And so then we talked about the soul, but we kind of went, the soul is the mind, will, and emotions. And we should get those straight, kind of thing. And then the whole idea that we're supposed to save souls. So then that was a little confusing too. But
For a different day.
But it seemed like souls needed to be reformed. So then, as I thought about salvation in that way, then we conform our souls to God. So I spent a lot of time doing that. But that part was just kind of, it could be corrupt, it could not be corrupt, all of that was just me. But I didn't really think a lot about the soul that much. But the spirit, and very separate. And so that when you die, this little part gets to go somewhere, and the body dies. And there's just a lot of teaching about, and a lot of, I guess, conventional wisdom over the centuries about how the body is just this carriage for the soul. And so it's not that important. We should take care of it, of course, but it's, definitely there's a separation. And that the soul and the spirit belong in some other realm, and the body is just going to go to dust. And so I've been a couple of things. I've been going to acupuncture for a long time now, and that's very much the way she practices it. It's very holistic, so mind, body, soul, body, and there's a lot of now evidence and good practice around discovering the connection between the mind and body, or part of us anyway, soul and body. And I'm trying to figure out how to say this, but I was riding my bike one day thinking about these things, and the thought occurred to me, the soul is infused in the body. The soul doesn't just live in its own little chamber carried around by the body. The soul and the body are together in the realm of the soul, and the body has wisdom from and is infused by the soul in some way. This is just something that I think that I know, but I don't know why I know it or how I know it, so it's tricky to write about. So I think that's true. I just don't know how to say it. But when I decided to interview my acupuncturist to see if I could learn some more as I'm trying to write about this. But in ancient China, like 5,000 years ago, they believed that they have different ways of talking about different aspects of our being, but there's parts of the self that it's very much the soul or the self or our beingness is in cahoots with the body for real. And so they even think about it that way. So when you're talking about what might be bothering you, then it has something to do with the liver and the spleen and and then the meridians of the body are carrying this energy through the body. And if you understand how the organs and the parts of the body along these meridians are helping or are like carrying our life force that lives within us, then you can conceptualize it in a way that you can then manipulate in order to keep the flow going in positive ways. So because she practices that kind of medicine, she would call it, my soul and has been treated in a way through the body with these little needles. And the healing and the insights and the growth and the breakthroughs that I have been able to experience, I don't think I could have without that physical intervention, because I had pretty much hit the wall with trying to figure these things out, think correctly, have the right insights, those kinds of things. There needed to be a physical something that allowed that to happen. And so that's what I believe. I'm not alone in that. I just don't exactly know how it works, and it's kind of a radical idea for me. But I switched from thinking that the mind is in charge and is the queen of the whole thing, and when it flips around and you start to realize that, really, we just carry that, we just have to have that ego, mind thing to help us, but really the big deal is the soul body.
I don't really know. The pieces are so, like, as you're talking and thinking about how you were saying how, like, we start integrating different pieces of our knowledge and how our experience and whatnot kind of later in life, and how that works with the soul and the courage that takes and whatnot. But then I'm thinking of, I wonder if, like, the soul is a physical piece, but our connection with that gets stronger, and as we're integrating those pieces, and so that, like, it's there all along, but our connection with it grows.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it becomes more, or it seems to become more of a physical piece.
Yeah, I
don't know.
I don't know how to say that, because it's like not physical, but it's not exactly physical.
Right.
So there's some I like the word infusion, because it's like I think it's together in a way that we don't get how that works. We want it to be either or. And
On a cellular level.
yeah. I mean, if you think about the idea that our bodies, in every single cell is energy, like, that's kind of a new concept I'm thinking about, and that energy isn't exactly, I mean, it is physical, but it's not, I don't know, I'm running out of But I think there's some union there that we're not used to being able to talk about. And so it's not like my soul lives in my liver, but there's something about how the liver and the spleen function together. So in Chinese medicine, this is what I learned. Chinese medicine, the soul exists like above the belly button and below the rib cage. And I'm like, really? The two, she calls them something, they're centuries or something like that, are the liver and the spleen, the yin and the yang. And I don't know which is which, but the functions of them in some, I'm telling you, that conversation just blew my mind. So I don't really understand it. But it impressed me that 5,000 years ago, without any westernized thinking, this incredible system of working with the human body to heal it and to keep it in working order was created and practiced with deep reverence to the body. You know, it was Descartes that said, right? Descartes that said, I think, therefore I am. That was the signal of modernism, you know, basically. Oh my gosh, I think. That's what makes me a human being, because I think, you know, well, does it really? You know? So the elevation of the mind came, and thank God, but there were people who knew ancient way more than we know right now, way more than, and it sounds like hocus pocus to us, but I certainly have experienced a more whole, and so has Ted. Ted probably has had the most transformation of anybody that I know through acupuncture. So some connection between, I don't know. So you're asking this question that's like, as you can tell, it's right on
So you're saying yes?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, because I could just get to the point.
But
Yes or no?
Yes, but I don't know why and understand
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking.
Next question.
So did you get the answers you were looking for, or did that bring up some more answers?
Or questions.
Or quick questions, I meant.
No, there's a lot of things being said that are consistent with I have some different ways of framing things.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me it's a continuum. This is physical. Gravity, you can't see it. You can see its effect. Electricity. I recently bought a little tool that I can just put right up to a wire that's insulated. It'll tell me if there's electricity in that wire. If we had the right tool, we could discover the activity of these energies inside the body they're talking about by the Chinese medicine. Perhaps that's moving in the realm of, we'll one time have, at one point in the future, 1,000 years from now, we'll have a tool that will detect the soul.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That would be an awesome.
And then we can see that there's some people that really don't have it.
How are they walking around without a soul?
It's entirely possible.
I've seen these experiments, you know, with, you've probably seen that little film about the water, that experiment they did with water, and how thought affects
What the
matter.
belief is what she's talking about.
Yeah, but there's
another.
this, it was
It's
referenced.
in What's a Belief Do We Know? Yeah, the water experiment.
So somebody took 4 jars of water, the exact same kind of water, and they labeled the jars with different thoughts. So love and contentment, and I don't know what they were, but one of the 4, I think it's 4 jars of water had the thought, I hate you, I'm going to kill you. And so then they took, because it was the same water from the same source, and they looked at the water molecules under a microscope. They were all the same. And then after a certain period of time, they put these water molecules under microscopes, and they had different shapes, according to whatever the thought was on the, and it's just a label. And so they were Nice Thoughts had beautiful configurations of the molecules.
Yeah,
And
flowery looking things.
the
and
other
very
one
pleasant.
just looked like a war zone.
Crystallized
Just
them down.
looked
Haunted
terrible.
house on Halloween. Yeah, it was just, it looked horrible, shadowy and spiderwebby. And
What's it
Yeah.
called, that experiment?
it's
You
the
probably
water
could-
experiment that's part of the discussion in the movie called What the Bleep Do We Know? There's actually two What the Bleeps. There's a first one and a second one. They talk about it in both of them, but
It's Kawasaki, right?
yeah.
Is it?
It's a Japanese water experiment. You might want to.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
you maybe could get there through that.
Yeah,
It was
YouTube
done
probably has
a long
just a
time
segment
ago.
of it.
And then this other one that I saw, this film where in a classroom they took two plants, identical plants, and they put them in a glass terrarium, yeah. And the instructions were speak nicely to this plant and bully this plant, and verbally. And over time, you could see that this plant was thriving and this plant was dying.
We did that in Horizons. We did
Did
that
you?
in our school.
Really?
Yeah, we did it on the 1-2 level. Exactly that. And the plant that people were instructed to be mean to was doing great. And we went around, and the kids were all saying that secretly they were, I'm just going to use my words, praying for its wellness.
So they couldn't be mean to the other plant?
They just couldn't do it.
They had all this silent support. Yeah, we wrote about it in our newsletter.
Experimental
That's so
error.
sweet.
Always gets in there.
Phyllis, I'm so encouraged for you because I don't know a lot about a lot, but I do know that both John of the Cross and Jillian of Norwich described right before their huge spiritual awakening that made them saintly and famous in the 13th century, both described the dark night of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were telling about your story and sitting and just hanging out, I was like, oh my gosh, you are there. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. Well, I think though that kind of illustrates this. Is we were talking about the mind wanting to be in control all the time, and it's really tricky. It will grab control of anything, even spirituality. Even your own recovery. It'll just grab onto it. Wants to help, or so let me help. Let me control by helping.
I got this.
Yeah, we got this.
Yeah.
We got it. And it takes a long time to really effectively break that hold. And usually suffering is the thing that does it. Although Thomas Keating and those who teach on centering prayer and transformation, he says there are two ways to heal. One is through suffering and the other is through deep meditation. So transformation can happen, but both involved like the nothingness. It's like there's something about that forms us in ways we can't control. So it's like a fast or something,
Fast from your mind.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
just died this last week.
What?
Oh, Father
Thomas
Keating.
Keating.
Yes, he
Yeah.
just died last week. Yeah.
He sure did.
Yeah, but what I learned from him is he talks about stages of spiritual development, and he does say that the ego will co-opt anything and will co-opt your spiritual practice and will co-opt which is kind of what happens with religions across the board and ideologies across the board, is that it's supposed to illuminate or illustrate a deeper truth and help us to move toward wholeness. But once it captures it, then it gives you 7 steps to this and 25 steps to that, and all that jazz. And it looks like we're being spiritual, but we're actually just being mental.
Following directions.
Yeah, following directions. Yeah, behaving. So, anything else about the subterranean nature? Did it kind of stimulate any of your own experiences, like how your soul might have been? The other thing I think is that your soul is leading you. It's trying to invite you. It's trying to move you behind the scenes kind of, and so if we can listen for that, sometimes we can go, oh, that's how I got here.
The thing I still struggle with, and I'm not sure that you'll even get to this in your book, but like getting that word Bennett, I mean, there's 10,000 common names that are given to babies in America, and pulling that one out of the air, I think goes beyond intuition, goes beyond any kind of thing we could explain outside of sort of a God thing. So then I have to go, okay, so the God thing, like praying for that guy that got totally healed in about 2 seconds of me praying for him, and I have nowhere to put that now. I have no faith system to stick that into. And so there's a part of this whole thing that gets into that divine connection, and I don't even know what to do with that, and maybe you don't either, but
Well, I sort of could, or I might, but the point is not, we could talk about God all flippin' day long,
right.
You know, and God is amazing and mysterious and wonderful, and, you know, when we're talking about God, there's no us in there. And so, it might be great, but when we're talking, that's why I kind of try to separate the two, not that there isn't God, but that I got so sidetracked because God's a big distraction. You know? It's a lot to know.
A shiny object, for sure.
And so it helped, and my own faith system kind of helped me do what I wanted to do from the beginning, which is not exist myself, not have to take responsibility for myself, not have to know myself. So God could do all that, you know, and I could just be a good little soldier. And that just wasn't sustainable, and I think I have every reason to believe that God wasn't happy with that either. So right now, for as long as I felt like the way I experienced God, if I could put it in this way, like God stepped back from me, I stepped back from God in order to do this, and but it's all just an illusion anyway, because if there is a God, then how can we ever be separate anyway? There's not a not God somewhere. You know what I mean? Like I say later, like learning about my soul as if there was a soul apart from God or God apart from my soul. That dichotomy probably doesn't exist. So just like we're talking about the body and the soul being infused, there's just something going on we don't understand. And we try to reduce it down to something we can understand. I'm not sure we're going to get very far, but if you kind of go, oh wait, there's a different thing operating here, and if I listen differently, or if I be with it in a different way, then maybe I might be formed by it or understand it in a different way. So that one of my other truisms that got me through the process was when I heard David White say, we need to develop a relationship with the unknown. And so on the one hand, how can you know something, how can you have a relationship without knowing something? And the unknown you can't know, so how can you have a relationship with it? But you can kind of hang out with it, like, you know how you would do with someone who's in a coma, or you can relate in ways that are not verbal and are not necessarily intellectual. So you abide with the unknown, you embrace the unknown, you befriend the unknown, you welcome the unknown, and you experience the unknown. You learn to tolerate the unknown, and so that in a way is relating to the unknown, so that then that darkness can kind of form you, or that so something happens when you relate in that way, when you hang out. It just feels weird because we're not saying, so how are you today?
So what I think I'm hearing you say is that all these sort of supernatural or inexplicable things are just little, hey, from the unknown.
Yeah, and let me tell
is
you.
that
Well,
fair? Or, I don't know.
I think so, but I don't know what exactly. But with the Bennett thing, it wasn't just a random sort of deal that was popped. Here's how I connected the dots. I was really worried about Dawn. She had preeclampsia, and the delivery could be really dangerous. And and we were all supposed to go to Christmas there. So baby wasn't supposed to be born until the 7th of January, and it's the middle of December, and so the Colorado people were all going to go there for Christmas. And so they had decided that they were going to let this baby cook as long as possible, but it was going to be born before Christmas. And so I was trying to figure out, well, should we go or shouldn't we? And is it going to happen or isn't it going to happen? And how? And are they going to want all these people in their house with the babies? And what if something goes wrong? So all these details were swirling around. Plus, I was worried sick. Like, of course, you're thinking, what if she dies? What if the baby dies? Oh my God, this can't happen. What if the baby is born with some sort of mishap that happens during and I was just beside myself. Plus, I'm trying to figure out what are we going to do. So I went. This is funny. Not funny, but I would walk every day, and I would just kind of worry and pray these things all the time, and I was generating all these worst case scenarios, and I just stopped, and I think I said it out loud on my walk. It occurred to me, if all these bad things can happen, then surely something good could happen too. Like if there's all these futures that are possible, I want this one. And so I kind of stood there. I didn't pray, dear God, please, if it be thy will. I was like, no, damn it, this is what I want. I want that baby to be born safely. I want nothing to go wrong. I want everything to work out the way it's supposed to work out, and us all be able to experience a lovely Christmas together. If I get to choose one, that's what I pick. And I kind of did it with that attitude, which was not very prayerful. But it was kind of like stamping my foot. Damn it, this is what I want. And so I'm not going to let this go by without at the very least, saying what I want. I had no faith whatsoever that could happen. And so when Bennett popped into my head, that to me was my soul saying, or some God saying, or something saying, it's going to be all right. It was like a sign, like a little sign. It was going to be all right. Why? I don't know. Whether it was or not, I don't know. But that's how I took it, and it was. Everything was fine. She wasn't, she might have been in danger, but it went well, and he was born healthy.
And it was a lovely Christmas.
And it was a lovely Christmas. It really was. So, I don't know how these things work, and I'm not sure we're supposed to know. In a way, you're just supposed to listen and go with it. Teresa, were you going to say something?
I just wish you could tap into it more. Like I've had several things over the years. Like I used to be like, just a couple examples, I used to be like a super spiritual Christian, and I would read my Bible and do stuff, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, this chapter is really like hitting me this week, and I'm just found it in my devotions, and then I'd go to church on Sunday, and that chapter was what they read. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was like, I'm in tune to something here, and then randomly, non-spiritually, I was driving a couple months ago, and I listened to this radio station that plays mostly like Americana kind of music, and 105.5, by the way. And I don't know why, but I was thinking about this Nirvana song, and it wasn't one of their top 40 songs or whatever. It was this random Nirvana song, and it came on the radio. Like, I'm like, what? Like, and why doesn't that happen with lottery numbers? So there's something, right?
Yeah.
I've heard it described as a matrix. Not pre-Matrix the movie, but there's information going around, and sometimes you can tap into it, and you don't know why, it just comes to you. So I'm reading this book right now by Jewel. It's her autobiography, and she was very into this New Age stuff where this was when people were channeling ancient whatever, like woo-woo weird. But the way she described it was exactly like the charismatic stuff that I was talking. I'm like, it was just weird. Like they were walking by faith. They would just use different words, but it was the same kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So it's something, and it's there, and I feel like everybody's reaching for it somehow. You know, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, and so I definitely believe that exists, and I just am not going to go there. Like, went there in the charismatic movement, and thought I had that all figured out. And it's not that it's not real, not that it's not a real true thing. It's just not
meant to be figured out.
Or maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe it is. I really don't know. Maybe it's all quantum physics after all. You know, but how we interact with that, if we get lost in the bigger thing of it, I think that we can miss what we're actually being invited to inside of our own soul. So that's why I'm kind of staying outside of that.
So I would say that people abuse it.
Yeah, it can be abused, manipulated, or whatever.
I think too, just for quieting the mind, creating space and pauses, and kind of taking it out of the driver's seat a bit, that meditation is key. And you mentioned centering prayer. I do centering prayer. I also just do mindfulness. And that way, you know, thoughts can come, but we learn not to grab them, just to sort of let them keep going, and then that can be integrated into practical daytime experiences.
Yeah.
Coincidences are of great, intense curiosity to human beings. And there's some, great, I'm sure, material to read about. But it's like we are programmed to zero in on these amazing coincidences. I listened over the last couple of years to 2 different podcasts. Like maybe one was, I don't remember, one of the major ones, like Hidden Brain, or the NPR ones, a couple other kinds. And just coincidences that people have experienced, they're amazing.
Yeah.
And some of it maybe, they're just different models how to think about it. Because certainly we are so many different places and we have so many different thoughts. Some of them are just bound to align in an unexpected way on an unexpected day.
Yeah. And
some are, we can choose to just view it differently, and certainly if there is information or other realms that we are not yet knowledgeable about, that would be one explanation. There could be other explanations.
Yeah. I'm just noticing we're a little over time, so I'm gonna, and we can hang out for a while if you want, but I just want to let you go and honor the time. But anyway, thank you. I think it's kind of a fascinating conversation. Thank you.